Tonight we're going to talk about the stages of societal change and what we go through as a society, how we evolve. I picked this cartoon because it illustrates pretty nicely the idea of societal change. Societies generally started out as hunting and gathering here. That was the most similar behavior to animals. We moved to agriculture, and we're agricultural societies for a while. Moved into the industrialization area, and then we moved into post-industrial, and we'll talk about those four types of societies this evening. So the first one to talk about is hunting and gathering societies. This is when small groups of nomadic hunter-gatherers focused on foraging and hunting for food, and they existed naturally in areas with an abundant food supply and natural resources. And they were geographically limited by this, and mostly stayed in areas where they were able to easily find food and natural resources. So they wouldn't be in rocky areas as much. They would be in areas that had a fertile abundance of resources. It took most of their time to successfully live off the land, so they didn't really have time for innovation, recreation, things like that. Food finding and consumption took up most of their time. And in order to be successful, they had to adapt very well to their environment. So that would require for them to be able to move around a lot and be very nomadic. They existed approximately 50,000 years ago in what was known as the Neolithic period. They lived in small groups of approximately 150 people, and this continued for about 2,000 generations. Culture and population changed slowly over this time. So if you think about it, you make up one generation, your parents make up another, your grandparents make up a third. So imagine 2,000 generations with essentially the same societal makeup, to give you an idea of how slowly the culture and population changed. Also, in this type of society, status and role were closely linked together. So what that means is, if you think of status now, who is the wealthiest or the most popular? Maybe think of a couple celebrities or entrepreneurs or really wealthy people. Think about the things that they do, how they made their money. Think of a few examples in your mind. And in this type of society, in contrast, the tribal leader, which would be the highest status in the society, was given to the person who was strongest or who was the best hunter. So that left for everyone else to become mostly a follower, as there was a limited division of labor. So either you were the leader or you were followers, and all you did essentially was spend your time looking for food. So there really wasn't a whole lot of other labor to worry about. Of course, we wouldn't have time for Facebook, so this cartoon here kind of pokes fun at that. He wants to post a picture of his hunt on his wall, which of course is supposed to be making fun of Facebook, but I forgot that you guys were too cool for Facebook when I found that cartoon. So disregard. Then came agricultural societies. Approximately 10,000 years ago, hunter-gatherers began to farm in areas where climates allowed it by learning to domesticate plants and animals. This also was known as pastoral and horticultural societies, as they dealt very closely with animals and plants. And the societies began to move less and less and began to build permanent structures that would obviously stay throughout the years, instead of being things that they could pick up and pack up as they move along. So as the food supply increased as a result of learning how to domesticate plants and animals and use them, the population grew along with that. So population and food supply are correlated, so that when food supply increases, population does as well. And then around 5,000 to 7,000 years ago, the plow was invented, and that allowed some groups to develop as agricultural societies. This is when people are able to use the land to grow crops, and that increased food supply dramatically. So over the course, after the Neolithic period and after the hunting and gathering phase, food supply began to dramatically increase, leading to a boom in population. So when the population increased dramatically as well, these agrarian city-states emerged, and they contained often up to 1 million people in one city. And this type of society continued for approximately 500 generations. So think again, if you will, you consist of a generation, your parents are the second generation, grandparents are the third, if we're counting backwards. 500 generations. I doubt that anyone here knows anybody in their family 500 generations ago. And that gives you an idea of, again, how slow change was at the beginning, as how slow society evolved from the beginning of societies up through modern times. Then we have industrial societies, and this might be a society that you guys are more familiar with. They're built on the basic idea of using technology to create goods, and they began to emerge in the 17th and 18th century during the Industrial Revolution of the Western world. So you should have talked about that in European history or world history and U.S. history. And in this phase, human labor became more efficient and less costly in conjunction with technology like the steam engine. So things were produced quickly and produced in greater quantities, therefore it costs less in time and in labor. So the availability of goods also increased. There were improved farming techniques as a result because technology improved, and there was more land that was able to be farmed, and fewer people needed to do the job because technology was able to take the place of some of the people that previously did the job. So that allowed for people to specialize their labor, and new jobs were created. New jobs emerged, so people were able to do different things rather than simply be tied to their land and dependent on the land for a livelihood and for food supply. So industrial societies often have less inequality than agrarian societies, even though there's a larger range of social classes and a larger range of possible jobs, because the overall quality of living is much better. So if you imagine, if you think about somebody in your neighborhood, maybe the person that's not as well off, or someone you've encountered before, maybe not as well off, those people typically still have access to technology in some way. They might have a cell phone, they might have access to a TV, maybe they're able to utilize a community computer like in a library. So still, they have a better quality of life in general than somebody who's currently living in an agrarian society in the world that might not have access or familiarity to any technology. The industrial societies lasted only 9 generations in some parts of the world, but they still continue in others, depending on where the countries are in development. So 9 generations, we think about that, that's a lot faster in comparison to the previous 2 societies we talked about. The change is happening much quicker as we become more evolved. So think about that and wonder if that might be a pattern or having something to do with technology. Okay, and then we bring ourselves to the post-industrial societies. Societal change occurs when people move from an economy based on manufacturing to one based on service and technology, and that can be classified as post-industrial. So we switch our focus from manufacturing goods, and we focus it more on providing services and developing technology. So we still need basic food and goods, but we find those from other societies and we import those. And typically the population is much larger than what our resources can provide. So things like energy and food and goods have to be imported from other people. There are 3 key characteristics to these type of societies. The first one is there's a shift from manufacturing to services. So former factories or former manufacturing cities might have died out or gotten smaller, or those factories have moved overseas where labor is cheaper, and the focus is now on service. The second characteristic is you'll see a rise of science and technology-based industries. So like Silicon Valley in California developed in our post-industrial society, and that is of course an area where a lot of technological research companies and development companies are based. And the third characteristic is a rise of new technical elites. So people who have a lot of power and wealth and status are typically those who have something to do with technology or advanced entrepreneurship. So think of somebody like Bill Gates, because he, of course, comes up with new software that we all depend on. And then maybe people who run the Apple company, or we think about the creator of Facebook. So people who are powerful and wealthy are typically associated with controlling and developing latest technology. There's a great surplus of wealth and goods, and material culture is the most developed of all societal forms. And why do you think that is? Bonus question, if you can write that in your notes, why you think that material culture is most developed in the post-industrial societies rather than in hunting and gathering or agrarian or industrial societies. So the question again for bonus points is, why is material culture most developed in a post-industrial society as opposed to the 3 other types of societies? So if you can answer that in your notes and circle it or star it and let me see it when I'm checking notes, then I can give you a bonus point. And that will go into your 6-week grade. Also, there is an expanded division of labor and globalization. So in these societies, we see a huge amount of opportunities for jobs, and there's different jobs in different fields, and they range from part-time minimum wage that some of you guys might have when you're working after school, and they can range up through technology or graphic design or engineering or all types of fields. There are many, many different jobs that exist. And then, of course, an increased level of globalization, because we talked earlier about how post-industrial societies have to import their own basic food and goods from other societies that are currently in the industrial phase, because it's typically less expensive to just import it instead of having it be created here where labor costs are higher. So you'll see an increased interdependence from post-industrial societies on other countries, thus an increased level of globalization. So that's all I have for you today, just to talk about different types of societies. And if you have any questions, of course, email me or come and see me before or after school. Have a good night.